Two roads diverge in a wood. And I took the one less traveled by. That has made all the difference. Well-known lines by a famous poet, and they're written and spoken from the perspective of an older man, looking back on the course of his life at some pivotal moment in the past, an ordinary time and circumstance, and yet, in retrospect, the decision made there and acted upon became the destiny of his life. Here's another well-known line. See if you can recognize it. I could have been somebody. I could have been a contender. Instead, I'm a bum. Who recognizes that? Who is it? Who said that? You're close. It's on the waterfront. Brando, Marlon Brando. Yes, 1950s, black and white movie. Same perspective as that Robert Frost poem. Older man looking back at the course of his life. He sees that pivotal moment, that decision made. And yet for the character played by Marlon Brando, from that point on, his life becomes smaller and smaller. Now, not that anyone in this audience would have those kind of regrets, but just for the sake of the program here, why is it? What is it about these turning points? That's what fascinates me. Why does one man look back with satisfaction and another with regret? And if they have such a profound impact on our lives, why don't we have a name for them? Why don't we learn about them in school? And what do you see when you look back? I know for myself, I can look back and see a day and a night like no other. An ordinary time and place. It wasn't a time of great achievement. It wasn't wonderful romance or any kind of courageous act. It was just an ordinary time and place. And yet, in that moment, I stood on the tipping point of a fulcrum in time and met my own future. Would you like to hear about it? It was a time before laptops and cell phones. And on a warm August evening, I sat with the children on the inside of a Goodland, Kansas diner out on the eastern prairie. We were tired, heading home. The Colorado line was just down the road, and we were watching the sky outside transform itself into orange, pink, and red. Home. The kids were out of school for the summer. I needed to get away, someplace away from Denver. A place not too expensive. A place like Ohio. The home of my parents, still living together in the house I grew up in. Home. It's been a long year for all of us. My job was gone. The oil company I worked for had closed its doors in the collapse of the last oil boom. Sometime after that, the children's mother let me know it was her time and turn to go for the brass ring, and then she was gone too, in a tight green skirt and a fast red sob, moving to California with the money from her mother's estate. But that night, inside that window, inside that diner, behind that plate glass window, the kids and I, we were a pack of three, planning the rest of our trip and watching outside as the bright edge of that rising moon was breaking up through the asphalt in brown prairie. It looked like it was coming right up out of the center of the street. And over hamburgers and milkshakes, we planned the rest of our trip. Where would you like to wake up in the morning? We can get a motel right here. Start out first thing, be back in Denver by lunchtime. Let's go home. Okay. I'll drink a couple cups of coffee. Finish the drive tonight. You can wake up in your beds in the morning. Let's go home. So we slurped down our milkshakes, finished our fries, and headed out the door of that diner, only to stop in our tracks and stare up at that huge, glowing ball of a moon. It was sorrel and huge and hanging right in the sky over Main Street. Holding hands, we stopped and stared and slowly made our way to the GMC pickup, the one with the green license plates and the tail-wagging lab in the back. And we all settled in for that last leg of our journey. The little boy, he arranged his pillow and his blankets on the floor of that truck, and he hummed his own special song as he rubbed his thumb and forefingers along the yellow satin fringe of the blanket. And his older sister, she had the seat up above and always organized. She had her pillows and her Polly Pockets and her books, and they were arranged just so, and she wrapped herself in her warm blanket. And they were both sound asleep as the truck headed west, moving out of town. Now, has anybody here ever made that drive across eastern Colorado at night? Then you know it's a very, very big place. That truck rolled on, the only vehicle for miles across an endless sea of prairie and sage. And every time that truck would roll over the crest of one of those low hills, I wanted to see mountains in the moonlit distance. Every time, all I got was more sand and another low hill up ahead. Truck rolled on. The moon rose higher in the sky. It was a small silver ball now, hanging above the horizon. The only sound was the warm, rushing wind coming in through that open window, keeping me awake. And I knew that night the only things I cared about in the entire world were riding down that road in the moonlight. Our lives were on wheels. We could go anywhere we wanted, to Alaska, and a brand new start. Back to Ohio, with its safety and predictability. And back to Denver, where everything felt raw and uncertain. We had only to choose. The truck rolled on. The moon rose higher in the sky. It was small and white and somewhere behind us, and the wind still came in through that crack in the window. It was cooler now, and with it came a sound, just barely audible. And then it was gone, leaving me to wonder if it was even there at all. Truck rolled on. The moon rose higher still, and the hair on the back of my neck rose up as that sound returned. It was low and resonant this time. I looked over at the children. Neither one moved. They were both sound asleep, and I had to smile as I waited in the stillness, wanting that wonderful sound to return. And it did. It did. Pure and soothing sound filling my senses. And then it was gone, leaving me this time sitting in that stillness, hoping for that wonderful sound to return. And it did. Mellifluous and clear and filling the cab, filling my senses. Coming to me from outside of the truck, this beautiful voice saying two words over and over: come back. Come back. Come back to Denver. It was as if I had ears at the center of my heart, this irresistible attraction. It was pulling me and the kids and the dog and the truck back to Denver, back to all the changes. That was my turning point a long time ago. So much more than just a decision to return to a city, a geographical place. It was a choice. It was a commitment to stop being broke and depressed and jobless and to start being more. Late that night, The truck pulled into the driveway of our home. A wave of relief just washed through me like a wave. The voice, it was quiet now. It had left us out on the highway back when the harsh lights of the city first came into view. But the memory of it still filled my senses. I didn't want to lose the memory of it to sleep, but before taking the time to write down the words to this story, I picked up each of the children, wrapped them in their blankets, carried them into their beds, kissed them goodnight, and I said the goodnight words. Same words I'd always said to them, for as long as they could remember. Same words I would continue to say for many years to come. There is no one like you in the whole wide world. I made a commitment that night. I made a commitment to become more, to be a nurturing, providing, protecting father. A few months after that happened, I was fortunate enough to be accepted into the evening law school program at DU. A few years later, I graduated. I was offered a job. I thought it was the answer to all our problems. Not so much. You see, single parenting, or being a single dad, and the practice of law, they would soon demonstrate that I had lots of unresolved loss issues that I was carrying over from that first part of my life. I needed help. And I'm not talking about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I needed man therapy and men's groups. And with that support, I was able to recommit routinely to this journey of fatherhood that I was on, and to a personal quest for healing and hope. It was me, the kids, Cody the dog, 2 cats, Fatima and Earl, and we had good times, and we had struggles. And by the teen years, they both were clearly demonstrating the intent to fly away from our suburban home and the town they called Little Fun. And I began to write about all the things that were happening, about aging and rites of passage and emancipation. And I would write for an hour or two in the mornings before getting up for work, or before going to work. And little by little, a story began to emerge. Ben would go to college. He's the youngest one. He went to CSU, graduated, got a job out of state. Turns out he couldn't stay away from Colorado for very long. In 2007, he found a job up in the mountains near Beaver Creek. It was with a building construction firm. A year later, recession hit. There was an economic collapse and another layoff coming down the road. But for Ben, he had a season pass, he had a brand new deck, and his brand new snowboard. And he had a dream, and he had a goal, a very specific goal. He was going to ride for 80 days, that ski season. And I do believe he did. And I know he is still up there 6 or 7 years later, riding that board with more speed and skill than I could possibly hope to keep up with him on my tired legs and aging skis. Lee, of course, has her own story. Always a willful child, she could not stay in Colorado for long. Unlike her little brother, she never applied to a single college, never filled out a financial application form, but she had a plan. She would enlist in the Navy right at the end of the summer following her graduation from high school. And she had a date, a Monday, September 11th, 2001. When the Denver airport reopened several days later, she was on a plane to Chicago and the Naval Training School in Great Lakes, Michigan. She went to basic, she went to A school, she studied computers. She was assigned to a small aircraft carrier called the USS Saipan. A year later, she was on her way to the Persian Gulf in one of the Iraq wars. And a year after that, she came home safe and sound. During her 8-year enlistment, there would be one more cruise to the Gulf. and stays in more third world countries than I can name. And I am so hugely proud of her. And I am so hugely proud of her brother as well. And it has been a long journey. It's taken me a long time to find my voice and be able to tell this story. And I hope that by doing so, I can demonstrate to others, especially younger men, that it's okay to struggle and it's okay to ask for help. And most important, that being a good father is a high aspiration for any man. And I have good news. You can have more than one turning point. I just had one a few months ago, this past summer. Yes. As a matter of fact, I launched this career as a speaker and a storyteller and a writer. I launched my second book, and if you want to talk about that after this program, we can talk about it some more. And I let go of the practice of law because I knew I had to make space in my life for this new career to blossom. So, that brings me to my challenge for you. I ask you at the beginning of this program, what do you see when you look back at your turning point? Because we all have one. And I'm just wondering, are you moving on up? Can you look back with satisfaction? Or are things kind of flat, nondescript? Or are things kind of spiraling downhill very, very slowly? Because I do believe that everyone has the potential to change the direction, the course of their life. But I say potential, which is very different from ability. It takes action, it takes commitment. But everyone can do it and make that change.